We're 3 seconds in. Congratulations. All right, it is 4 o'clock Eastern time. We're Thursday, October 1st. Welcome to October. It's starting to feel like fall. I live in Dallas, Texas, which is different than most of the PTP team, and temperatures are starting to get down into the, at least in the mornings, they've been in the 60s and some of the high 50s. So fall's getting there. It feels like it's starting to feel nice outside. So welcome to the discussion this afternoon. We've been doing this now for probably close to 6 months. Attendees have really enjoyed the conversation. So what we're trying to do with these sessions is really, instead of bombard you with slides and words and diagrams and stuff like that on a screen, just have a conversation between industry experts about topics that we think are relative. So I think we've got a good one for you this afternoon, kind of diving into security visibility. So we're looking forward to that. And in just a moment, I will introduce our panelists for the discussion and get a little bit further into the topic itself. I do, however, have marketing responsibility for PTP. So it's my job to do shameless self-promotions about the organization and the things we're doing while I have you here. So I'm going to do that right now. We're super excited to, we announced this morning, a press release went out this morning. We got some blog posts and some social media posts about us receiving the recognition as Company of the Year for CIO Applications Magazine in their 2020 Consulting Services Companies for AWS. So, for those of you that have followed PTP for a long time, the investment that we're making as cloud enablers. About our tight relationship with AWS as an advanced consulting partner, as well as having the life sciences competency. Part of what we do for AWS also is that that path to the cloud, the network access piece. And so our relationship with Cisco is a strong part of that. And that's part of the conversation that we're having today is with the Cisco Stealthwatch Cloud team. But we're really excited about the recognition that we received, really a demonstration. So congratulations to us. Just wanted to share that with you. There's a blog out there. You can reach it if you just go to ptp.cloud and hit the blog page, and you'll see it and read it. And then from there, you've got access to the actual article. So I hope everybody that's on the call that's interested checks that out. Additionally, there's a number of different ways to engage with us. There's a lot going on from a week-to-week basis at PTP. So the webinar panel discussions like we're doing today are all recorded, except for the one about a month ago that I forgot to press record. Sorry, James Boyd. Sorry, Steve. Sorry, Chris. That was a great discussion. That's those of you that were with us live heard, and nobody else is going to have the opportunity to. But all the others that I've done, we've had the opportunity to record, and so those are up on our resources page to go check out. A number of different topics that I think are relevant around remote support services and collaboration capabilities with WebEx and cost optimization for cloud and cloud security and threat hunting and you name it. So some great stuff there. Check us out on LinkedIn. That's where a lot of the communications about the things that we're doing comes from. So you certainly have the opportunity to see things that are going on with us there. Subscribe to the blog, and then obviously you get some notification of the cool things that are going on right now. So with that, let's introduce the group. So I did mention that my name is Gary Derheim. I'm responsible for managed services and marketing at PTP. I get the opportunity to be able to host these sessions. It's fun for me. I get to learn something every single time we do that. So it's kind of neat to have different groups of people on, different experts, and just be able to listen and try to help facilitate the conversation as best I can. So with that, there are two individuals on the PTP team that are here with us today, and then two esteemed colleagues from Cisco. So I'll let you guys just kind of give a brief introduction about yourself. And Chris, you want to kick it off?
Sure. Yeah, this is Chris Dusio. I'm the VP of Engineering at PTP, and responsible for pretty much overseeing the engineering that we do here. And part of that, obviously, is this journey to the cloud and cloud enablement and helping customers move their workloads into cloud environments. And also a big part of that is being able to secure those environments. So the topic of discussion today is kind of very germane to what we see a lot of customers facing, which is putting their workloads into the clouds, but not necessarily understanding the vulnerabilities that might be present there. So hopefully this discussion will generate some good dialogue around that.
Awesome, thanks.
No problem.
Steve.
Yeah, hi, I'm Steve Hoevenaar. I am the Director of the Security Services Operations within PTP. As I like to say in all of these, and if you go back to the recordings, you can probably replay this part. But you know, we like to either security first. So I like to say, you know, we don't really limit ourselves to just cloud or just traditional, but we will do any and all things security.
Awesome, thank you. And let's go to the Cisco side. Jim, you want to start?
Sure, this is Jim Reilly. Thanks for the intro, Gary. So I head up sales and business development globally for Stealthwatch Cloud, with a primary focus today on partner development and partner sales, right? So myself and my small team here would work closely with people like PTP in the market to help bring a solution to end users like you.
Nice view you got behind you, Jim.
Yeah, thanks. It's a nice day here in Jersey.
All right, John, how about you?
Hello, everyone. I run the worldwide sales engineering team for the Stealthwatch Cloud product, which we'll be talking about today. So good to meet you all.
Fantastic. Excellent. Well, with that, I want to just jump into the discussion because I think that we've got a lot to talk about. So as we said, you know, we're going to kind of talk about this this challenge of users everywhere, data everywhere, and then start to address, you know, how we can help enable organizations that have some challenges there. So no more slides. Let's just get into conversation with the group. So I think a good place to start, and Steve, I'll kind of kick it off to you, is I know, you know, we talk a lot with customers using the NIST framework as kind of a common framework that seems to work well across different verticals that we work with. And so identify, detect, protect, respond, recover. You know, a lot of customers tend to really focus on protection, which they should, right? Being able to put the right locks on the windows and the right locks on the doors. Just wondering if you can kind of talk about and kind of answer the question. So if I already have those tools in place, I've got my, you know, my firewall and my endpoint and things like that. Why do I need to start thinking about detection type technologies?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head when you talk about, you know, everyone puts their protection stuff in first, which it should go in first. It's just a sign of maturity to get from protection to detection. So I would ask customers or ourselves to say, you know, ask yourself two questions. One, how do you know your protection equipment's working? We assume it's working. We hope it was set up right. There are people with their hands in the systems, in some places a lot of people, in some places very few. So how do you know your protection's working? And then the second thing is, how do you know it's going on? And when I say that undetected compromises, you know, how do you detect those? Well, 30% of all data breaches are due to stolen credentials. So stolen credentials aren't necessarily going to point out or have a firewall stop something, or IPS say, hey, something weird's going on here. Now, if you have something, a detection item like a NetFlow machine learning analysis system, like Stealthwatch, that's going to be something that's going to track that. That's going to say, here's an anomaly and detect for you. The other things it can help you do, tune security configurations within your environment. So you don't know what you don't know. So you don't know if your TLS versions are wrong unless you have some sort of detection gear out there helping you do those things. You can catch inappropriate use by employees. Now, obviously, we all like to block the adult sites, the gambling. This happens, and you know, not to start telling war stories this early into the into the happy hour, but what happens when you have an employee that spends 100% of her time or his time on the Beanie Baby collector site. I mean, there are things going on within your environment that reduce productivity. And I think just not only from a security perspective, but from a productivity perspective, detection equipment can help you. And then the last thing I would just say, architectural recommendations, web server encryption upgrades, outdated applications or OS levels, and inappropriate use of credentials are all things that without looking at it, you don't see them. So like you said earlier, it's a maturity level. It's the obvious next step. It's that layer to the security onion or security parfait, depending on which camp you're in, right?
Right. Yeah, and trying to get a sense for the volumes of all that data, what does it mean, and kind of getting to that next level of kind of breaches before they occur makes a lot of sense. I think another, kind of good next place to go, and Jim, I'll come to you with this is, so okay, great, we're interested in better visibility. We know we've got some protection in our environment. We think we're doing the right things with configurations and firewalling and endpoint, but we want to get to this goal of better visibility of all the tools and elements in our network. But the networks are complex, they're different, users are everywhere. What are some of the challenges that customers are facing there? And kind of a segue into, perhaps how Cisco and Stealthwatch Cloud is trying to address that.
Sure, yeah, thanks. So I think a couple, right? And I think Steve touched on a few, is that number one, the growth of networks in general over the last 5 years, right? In terms of the types of infrastructure that needs to be supported, right? There's on-premise data center infrastructure, there's cloud architecture infrastructure, a lot of remote access to networks today that didn't exist maybe a decade ago. Okay, so the network is expanding, and as we've seen this year, in some cases, rapidly expanding, right? In response to you could say environmental issues, I guess, right? The realities of the world we live in today are going to force people to work in different ways. We were already on that path to begin with, right? I mean, I think remote working had been a standard across a lot of organizations for the last 5 or 10 years. So the network boundary, which used to be defined, is now undefined. Okay, so that changes the way people have to architect ways in which they protect that network and be able to detect and defend that network through detection. Number one. Okay, cloud growth is accelerating, right? So the idea is that you have a hybrid type infrastructure, right? So what we see today is people that are trying to move from data center environments or hardened environments into cloud environments. They want to be able to take advantage of the scalability and accessibility of the cloud. At the same time, what they've learned, or what we've seen our market and end users learn, is that the way you protect and defend an on-premise network is different than what you do to protect and defend a cloud network. Okay, and one way, the solution that we brought to market nearly 6 years ago is basically creating visibility. Or what we refer to as a baseline view of what a network looks like day in and day out in any environment, whether that be an on-prem network, a cloud network, or a hybrid environment. And it's that ability to create visibility for the purposes of behavior awareness and behavior control, and hence security, that we think separates Stealthwatch Cloud in the market. We think that the nuance around visibility and control is unique to Stealthwatch Cloud. If you think about historically, the more prescriptive approaches to, say, endpoint or network protection, where people operated within a framework, okay, an if-then scenario, right? If you saw different things or match patterns, or there was some analysis that indicated there was maybe a threat. Stealthwatch Cloud actually is able to isolate an actor on a network whose behavior has changed significantly from a prior period. And that's where we think we help merge that protect and defend, that realm between protect and defend.
Gotcha. And I think you brought up some things that I think will be interesting for us to get into a little bit deeper in terms of kind of how the tools are doing that. But maybe before we do that, I think it would probably be great to transition to you, John, and say, okay, great, we've kind of identified that we've got we've got hybrid environments, or we've got organizations with some on-prem data, and we've got cloud data. Now it's the job of a tool like this to be able to go pull the right data points so you can provide that level of visibility. So wondering if you can share with us a little bit about, what data is gathered in more of an on-prem environment versus the cloud environment, and kind of what kind of data points you're looking for there in order to provide that visibility.
Sure. So the core data that Stealthwatch Cloud and Enterprise consume is network telemetry. Network telemetry through what's happening on my network, things going north-south, things going east-west. What's really nice is the cloud providers have recognized that network visibility is an important part of security. And so like Amazon and Azure and Google, they've all made available that level of detail. I think of it as NetFlow in the cloud. So when you build a virtual machine in the cloud and it connects to something else or the internet or another virtual machine, that transaction on the network is recorded in the flow log. It's kept kind of in a bucket inside AWS or a storage blob inside of Azure. It doesn't really matter. But what we do then is we just go in and reach into there and pull that out and start to analyze it. So what's cool about the cloud is literally in 10 minutes, you could take a blank Stealthwatch Cloud portal and a cloud account, build the permissions needed to read that data, and we can start doing that modeling and visibility very, very quickly, which is different than on-prem. In addition to that, network telemetry in the cloud, we talked about things like what a user is doing, what their permissions allow them to do, what kind of network rules they're building, like security group rules. So security group rules like a firewall rule in AWS, for example. And so we look at those types of things too as additional telemetry sources to analyze and let you know about things that are happening that could be concerning. On-prem, it's the old ways of doing it forever, right? We have NetFlow from the switches and firewalls. We have Gigamon type solutions that are taps in the network. We can do span ports. What's a little different with Stealthwatch Cloud is we are a hosted service. And so to get it, say, from a Meraki firewall or from a 2960 switch or something like that, we have a local collector that the NetFlow talks to because NetFlow is unencrypted and it's not secure by nature. That collector wraps it in a TLS header and shifts it to the cloud. What's nice is it's a very dumb device. And so you're not spending a lot of money on hardware and memory and storage because the goal of this device is to push the data out to the cloud where all the storage and stuff is at. So that's kind of how we do it.
Great explanation. So I'm going to follow that up with, just if you're in engineering, you're seeing a lot of different customer environments. More often than not, do you see most Stealthwatch Cloud customers either cloud native, on-prem, or a combination of the two?
So we started out we launched our product with premises monitoring. That was 4 or 5 years ago. Jim was before myself. I would say we still see quite a few on-prem customers. Any big customer, and big's a relative word, but certainly the Fortune 1000, they all have both. I mean, it's rare that we talk to any customer that's a couple hundred employees or more that doesn't have some kind of cloud presence. So as you probably know from your own experiences, some are building new things up there, some are dipping their toe in the water, some are like, I'm going to just replace what I have here over here, and it's called the lift and shift. And so we haven't seen P&M or premises monitoring necessarily drop off, but it's still very active, actually. I'd say half of our bookings are premises monitoring still, and Jim might probably know more about that exact number.
Yeah.
Actually, across our client base today, we're probably seeing about a 50-50 mix, between private network monitoring and public cloud monitoring. Private network monitoring primarily in the SMB market up to mid-market, where we're helping people address the journey to the cloud. And as John talked about, in the select and enterprise space, more public cloud monitoring with the understanding, right? If you think about those companies, they've been using some sort of endpoint detection technology for a decade or more now, right? So that part of the market was a little more saturated in, say, cloud when we came to market 6 years ago.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks. That's helpful. So Chris, I want to come to you next on, I mean, you lead engineering for PTP. You've been hands-on in network and network security for years and years and years. So just from an outside consulting perspective, listening to what John said in terms of the model that they use, I mean, any concerns that you have as like consulting guy in terms of that approach? Any special considerations we would need to be addressing our customers with to help facilitate a solution like this, or just any input or comments based on the model for data extraction there?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's two aspects to it, right? There's the native cloud constructs of what Stealthwatch Cloud would be beneficial for customers that are in the cloud environment, and then there's the on-prem to cloud type of absorption of these net flow data flows and things like that we're sending up to the cloud to be consumed. So I think that was just touched on in a couple minutes ago here, where basically we're encrypting the traffic. If it's coming from on-prem to Stealthwatch Cloud, it's being encrypted. And if you think about it, just and just to touch on that aspect of the flow of traffic in and of itself, it's just very similar as if you were going to a website that has encryption-based technologies around it, like a bank or anything like that. They're using high-level encryption. So if you are one of almost everybody in the world that uses the internet for those types of transactions, or believes that encryption is a viable option to transfer stuff, then I don't think the risk, something like that, is very high. You can also, restrict the public IP addresses, for example, of the sensors that are sending information to Stealthwatch Cloud, as another example. So, that's just another way of bolstering that on-prem to cloud kind of absorption. Within the cloud itself, when you're setting Stealthwatch Cloud up, just like anything else, right? There's a shared responsibility model in terms of the way the cloud hyperscalers pretty much set stuff up. So if you were to do things and inadvertently do things incorrectly, or expose the network to people being able to get the stuff. So I'll give you an example, like an S3 bucket. If you don't set it up properly to collect your flows, and you expose it to the public internet, of course, there's a potential problem with that from a security perspective. But having said that, the Stealthwatch Cloud setup is pretty easy to set up. It has some very good documentation in terms of how to set up IAM rules that allow you to list resources within your environment, to be able to pull data, and obviously it's very similar to like what a VPC flow log is. But the thing about that is, and I'm using AWS term in this example, but you're not allowing, fundamentally, you're not allowing public access to that kind of stuff. So it's within your own account, within your own AWS environment, and it doesn't hurt to go back in. And for example, you can go into your, in AWS, for example, you can go into your S3 bucket, make sure encryption is turned on in the bucket itself. Obviously, by default, it's not exposed to the public internet, but that doesn't mean somebody's not going to do something stupid. One thing that I do think is really an advantage to using this product is that it goes out and, kind of think Steve touched on this earlier, it kind of alerts you to things that you might not normally be aware of, right? So you think everything's fine, and then, whatever, somebody comes in, they put something on the network that, especially like in the cloud, that's exposed for whatever reason. It's, got a wide open ECL on, and then it's allowing the world to connect to it on RDP or whatever it might be. The constant, the capability of having something like that being brought to your attention without you having to do anything about it to get that information is critical. I mean, when you're doing endpoint protection, like we were talking about earlier, that's great. But this also allows you to see like the normalized behavior within a network. So I'm kind of answering your question, but I'm going a little bit beyond the bounds of it. But from a security perspective, I think if you just follow the recommended integration aspects that Cisco has published, which are pretty comprehensive, And you could do, like I said, you could do a couple of other things if you'd like to do that, to to encrypt the places where the data is stored. That's fine too. But the encryption is end to end from customer site into the Stealthwatch Cloud, and you can control that, and you can also make sure that your VPC flow logs or your S3 bucket or whatever is secure as well. Aside from that, I mean, everybody's using SaaS-based applications nowadays and things like that. So again, it's just part of the normal evolution of the
Yeah, and Chris, to kind of build, you kind of talked about it. Knowing what's on your network, this tool allows you to know what's on your network, to know what IP addresses, and then to kind of self-categorize for you and say, this is a switch, this is a server, this is a database server. I mean, I think that's, anyone that's been in the traditional world of networking for a long time, that's invaluable to be able to, from a security perspective, to be able to know what's on your network, what that is, and to be able to identify those things, and not only identify them, but make sure they're operating like a switch would operate, like a server would operate, like a database server would operate.
Right. Exactly. And if you see something that's not normal, that's when you're getting alerted on that. You know what I mean? So it takes a lot of the guesswork out of manually going around and trying to map your network up and figure out if somebody's telling you the right information to know where things are. It literally just dumbs it down for you to the point where you can just kind of look and go, okay, here's what's going on. And that's great. I mean, it's, I usually don't like the super simplistic view of things, but in this case, it's not just simplistic. It's simplistic, but in a way that makes it valuable. You know what I mean?
I would say that the back end is probably not simplistic, but for the user, the customer, us, it's the ease of use is incredible.
But that's what I mean. Yeah, you're very well said.
Hey, Chris, this is Jim. You bring up a really interesting point, right? That sort of touches on what I started with. But what you described is that how relatively benign components of infrastructure architecture or service, could create significant risk. I'll let John speak to it briefly, but if all of you are aware of if we can talk briefly about the Capital One breach from a year ago or so, in which a major breach occurred for a very sophisticated and long-term Amazon user because of a stale access key. John, I know you have information on that. You want to hear that?
An Amazon user with a stale access key? Are you kidding me? That never happened.
I mean, yeah, there's been a lot of write-ups about that one, but it goes to show you that that it's important to understand what a user has access to, and then if they can assume a role, what that role has access to. I mean, it's a very different world than the on-prem world where you have users and groups. There, it's roles and cross-account links, and understanding what people are doing is critical to knowing what they can do too, right? Not just what they're doing, but what they have the ability to do is important. In that case, the key was hijacked and had access to buckets, and the buckets had data that wasn't supposed to be there, and so on and so forth. And that is that's why you have experts like these folks here to help with that transition.
Yeah, and we always talk about layers. That there's no we joke with Chris in particular about the easy button, because nothing really is an easy button. But there's it's discipline, it's structure, it's organization, it's all those things, having the right tools. I mean, and it takes multiple layers, and there is no easy button. And it's interesting, I think, just to go back to what Chris, you and Steve were saying about knowing what's out there. That's again, back to the NIST framework. That's that very beginning. Where's data? That's the first point of determining security. You can't do anything unless you know what you have and where it is and how it's being used. And so I think it's really imperative then to have that ability to see an ever-changing environment kind of real time.
I think the other thing too to take note of is that one of the places that I feel that and this will probably change over time, but one of the things that I feel like customers that are putting stuff into hyperscalers, that are moving workloads to the cloud and things like that, there's a lot of nuances to what you can have access to based on a number of different things, which is exactly what we were just discussing. And completely inadvertently, you could be, giving an access through something like an IAM role or some other methodology. There's like 15 different ways to get access to certain things, right? So, unbeknownst to yourself, you could actually create a situation where you might be putting your company at risk and not really know about it. So having a technology that can sort of, ring the bell and say, hey, you know what, this is probably not a good idea, is important because, let's face it, some folks are further along in this adoption of the cloud than others. And, not everybody is 100% right all the time when they do stuff. People make mistakes. It's just the way it is. But that's another nice aspect of having something that can kind of give you sort of a way to look at a workflow and say, is this actually legitimate, or am I giving too much privilege to a user or a role or something like that. So again, very important, I think, in the cloud space for sure.
Yeah. So I want to get into some of the detail around there's some interesting capabilities of the solution that I think provide some of the visibility. But before we do that, I want to address just kind of an evolving detection, type industry. So, I think the industry knows the term SIM, Security Information Event Manager. There's discussions about next generation SIMs, and some of that was all born, years ago out of PCI compliance and log management. And it turns to now I've got my logs and can I correlate my logs and things like that. So I'd like to, before we get more into the capabilities of the tool, between Jim, you and John, if you guys could just maybe describe Stealthwatch Cloud and either compare or contrast to SIM technology, so we can just kind of level set the audience a little bit.
John, you can take that because I know you've done that presentation a lot.
Yeah, so we typically don't displace a SIM. So what's a SIM do, right? It takes a bunch of disparate types of telemetry and it aggregates it together. It becomes a thing to do queries against and analyze and whatnot. And so you have folks like Splunk, you have Creator, there's lots of SIM vendors out there. And so it kind of depends on what they're using the SIM for. We have gone into some companies that were using it for network telemetry gathering. They were dumping NetFlow to, say, a Splunk, and it was just there, but they weren't really building any kind of meaning out of it, right? It couldn't analyze it in real time. It wasn't thinking about looking at security events unless they built a certain role. So when you think about a SIM being a data collection spot, and you, the user, kind of being the one who defines what you want to do, we're a little bit different in the fact that we are primarily focused on network telemetry. And with the engine we have an automatic way of doing the analytics where you don't have to define a bunch of rules and things. So I guess one way we're different is the fact that we are out of the box enabled. So if you do nothing but give us access to data, we will start to produce those outcomes we talked about, like identifying roles in the network, looking for security patterns, detecting behavior changes. So there have been times where, again, if a SIM was used for network collection, we've displaced that, or they've modified it. Other ones have really focused around a SIM as that single pane of glass in the organization. And so if that's the case, generally what we do is we kind of sit in front of that, and our northbound alerting goes to that SIM platform. And with the combination of what we can push and our API, they can open and close alerts, tag people, et cetera, through the SIM, and that goes back to our product. So I'd say we're complementary, and most times we rarely necessarily displace, but we also rarely have customers have their network data go to the SIM if they have a Stealthwatch in the mix, because we would do that instead of the SIM.
Okay.
And Gary, the one thing I'd add, especially across the SMB market, right, is and we've seen Stealthwatch Cloud used and positioned in this way. Is if you think about the complexities and cost of installing and managing a SIM, right, and limited resources from either budget or manpower perspective across that SMB space today, we offer a SIM-like service, okay, for a fraction of the cost and the complexity of the use. Right? So it's that ability to isolate, detect and isolate a threat in real time, right, which is ultimately what you're trying to do. Right, we do that in a different, passive but very effective way.
Mm-hmm. Makes a lot of sense. And having had some experience taking a enterprise SIM and actually delivering services to customers in a multi-tenant fashion, and one of the engineers that helped build that's actually an attendee. So, hey, James. But we learned the complexities of being able to, I mean, it took a lot of engineering to make that work that way. So, that's, I think that's helpful. Again, just because it's such a common term, I think it's helpful for hopefully for the attendees to be able to understand some of that difference. So then maybe to come back to probably to you again, John, it's, so I'm doing a little bit of research and, ahead of our conversation today and digging through some materials and coming across, part of the secret sauce, if you will, of what Stealthwatch Cloud's doing from that visibility, and that's the dynamic entity modeling, easy for me to say. So wondering if you can just kind of explain what that is, because I, based on what I could see, I think it's a big value to the capabilities of the product.
Yeah, I'll try to, I can explain it here in some simple terms. So you think about this, you hook up a thing that analyzes network telemetry to a brand new network. It doesn't know anything about it, your house or my house or your office. And so this is where we start to get this just tons of data, right? Network conversations. And so the goal of dynamic entity modeling is to start to understand the devices in the network. If a machine smells and talks like a printer, we're going to eventually watch it and say this thing is a printer on your network because it's PDL print server, it has relatively few conversations externally. And so we can start to infer the types of devices that are operating the network. That's part of the entity modeling. It's important because we're not getting it authoritatively, right? No one's saying this is a printer. We are watching traffic and saying, hey, this thing acts like a printer on your network. This is the database server and so on. And then once you have these inferred devices or roles, we call them, you can start to build behavioral-based rules around that. Should a printer be using Twitter? Something simple like that. Probably not. But an iPhone would likely be using Twitter and things like that, online platforms. And so part of our modeling is to analyze and go, this thing is a type of thing in the network. These types of things in networks usually do these types of things in general. And so we can alert you to when a thing happens that's different than normal. And that's part of that process of learning, as opposed to you saying, this is my printer subnet, this is my database server subnet, and defining all ahead of time. That's a simple example. Other ones are that we look at is, so now we have a thing in the network, we can say, this is how much data it sends per day on average, this is how many connections it makes, this is what countries it talks to, these are what countries it never talks to. We start to build a model of that machine's behavior on the network. And so every time we get new traffic, we compare it back to that machine's model. And simply saying is this new traffic within the norm of this machine and the role? Or is this thing like, did the traffic outbound or did it make a bunch of new country connections, like 20 new country connections to things across the world that previously had talked to just the US before, something like that? Those are examples of what goes into entity modeling. And the dynamic part just means that it happens on its own in the background versus you, the user, having to configure the rules. Hopefully that was a simplified enough version. I don't know. It's how I usually explain it.
No, I think it was great. And I always call myself the least common denominator. So if I can follow it, then I think everybody else can. So no, that was helpful. And as I'm listening to that, I'm thinking back to, I've got 20 or so year background in managed services that started from network monitoring and that whole world, and thinking about, some heavy tools that we used to creating and applying monitoring templates to unique devices in that world and setting thresholds and things like that. And obviously you've got to know what templates to go to what devices. And so this onboarding, this learning process was extensive. And so as I'm listening to you describe this process, it's, guess what? We don't have to do that. We're going to listen to behavior, and then we're going to start to apply, based on this baseline, we're going to apply some logic, I guess, if you will, to those devices and start to treat them that way. So it's fascinating to watch how the industry has moved to intelligent automation and allowing our tools to gather that information and creating these baselines. And back to kind of what, Jim's point was, is, hey, if you're in the SMB market, I mean, the engineering capabilities that you would need to do some of this original setup work and to do it right are significant. And so it's fascinating to see that, so much of that can happen in the background. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, Gary, I mean, I would agree. One thing I wanted to point out is this has been a gap in the security business for a long time. This knowing what's on your network, being able to figure out what kind of device that is, and then tracking its communication and really finding those hidden attack vectors that we haven't been able to easily see. Not only does this tool help you see that, for the users of this tool, I'm sure a lot of engineering went in to get to this point. But when you compare it to a SIEM does have a very different purpose, as you talked about, the logs, log correlation, log storage, PCI compliance, those kind of things with SIEM. But the SIEM was never designed to do what this is doing, which is actually finding that analysis of that flow data and using machine learning to actually say, hey, your printer just went to Twitter, as John said earlier. I don't think that's normal. Hey, your SQL server just offloaded a bunch of data to Russia. You might want to check that out. I think it's been a huge gap in security for a long time, and this fills it nicely.
I'll share a quick anecdote. I was in a call Friday with a pretty big customer, and this is a cloud environment. And this is a portal review, right, where we do a POV, we give this away for so many days, and they can trial it. And one of the things we do is we geocode every external IP address to a country. So USA, whatever. And they had Iran picked as an unusual country for them. They can select some countries. They go, we don't have traffic going to Iran, but the portal showed it, right? And so we dug down, and it was a team that had built a loose security group and opened port 80, port 22, and port 443 on an elastic load balancer. This was an Amazon. And yeah, there was traffic going to Iran, and this is things that they would never have known about, minus something kind of to tell them these things. And it's a real life example. And so now that team has to go back and find who's responsible for that machine and go address the security group issue. But it doesn't matter if it's on-prem or in the cloud. There's always little holes that you don't know about, and so it's a nice way of kind of seeing that stuff. And so that particular one I thought was interesting because it just happened on Friday.
Well, I think if you think about, how were we trying to do stuff like that even a couple of years ago, right? We'd have to be using some kind of product that could basically be on every endpoint in the network that could then go back and, kind of look at an attack vector and see what other devices got infected by something or something, like the ANT for endpoints being an example of that. But to do that and to be able to get all that information, it's a fairly cumbersome process, and it's still not as dynamic as this. This is like basically I'm sitting here just watching what's going on, and if something doesn't look normal like the way it normally does, then I'm going to notify you about it, which is an entirely different paradigm. So it's a lot less heavy lifting that you have to do from a setup perspective to be able to get a much better, in my opinion, a much better visibility into your network. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that was
what's not.
No, I think that's a great point, and I was actually going to go there next and bring this to either Jim or John. But I'm kind of thinking back to years ago. Those security decisions were being made by kind of hard and fast access rules or signatures that we update. Bad. Then if we saw anything that looked like that signature, then we decide that that's bad. But now, we're going to this, hey, we're going to create a baseline, and we're going to start making decisions based on anomalies to that baseline. And so without getting into too much detail, just, would love to just explain a little bit of that process, because I think when you take the modeling side and then you take this kind of baselining side, now we're really into kind of that next level of intelligent discovery of potential security threats.
I'll take a first pass, and John can add if need be. But You said modeling, Gary, right? So modeling might be unique. Modeling was certainly unique in the security space 6 years ago when Stealthwatch Cloud as observable networks first came to market. But it wasn't unique as a concept, right? So, there's lots of industries that have relied on modeling through the years, right? To be able to define or predict potential outcome, right? And that's basically what Stealthwatch Cloud does. That ability to maintain a model or having the entity itself, right, act as a protective device on the network. Okay, being able to build and maintain through time that visibility that allows us to create that model actually turns the endpoint, the entities, or even the network itself, okay, into a defender of the network. Okay, and that's what we think is unique, right? Rather than taking that prescriptive approach, like I mentioned earlier in the call, we're really in a very precision-oriented way, okay, revealing to our end users devices that we feel could be compromised or either are compromised but just haven't risen to a disruptive or malicious level at this point. Okay, so really the byproduct is that the ability to it's early detection. It's really early threat detection. Okay, by being able to identify the fact that the behavior of an entity has changed based on the model we've maintained, and we can say with certainty that entity is doing something different than it did a while ago. Also unique, one example we like to share, John. John talked about the printer, right? The local printer doing something, but a printer might look like in other security technologies, a printer might just look like an endpoint on the network, okay, that's acting. Okay, we know it's a printer because we have specific ways of identifying it, right? So for a lot of security technologies today, if they see that printer, they just see an endpoint connecting to the internet, right? And that might look totally benign. Okay, we have the ability to know that printer's never connected to the internet before. Okay, because we've been watching it for a year, right? So like I said, so there's just some subtle things that we're capable of detecting, okay, early on, okay, that allow people to identify and remedy breaches in ways that they weren't capable of prior.
Yeah, and I'd say, from my experience in working with this team and watching some of the things that we've done, and just, you learn about the industry is obviously, we've joked that, hey, the hacker guys are lazy, to a certain extent. So they're looking for the easiest way in. So it's like, let's go kind of scan environments. If something's going to be easy pickings, let's go there. I recall years ago, the point of attack was a FedEx shipping machine because it was actually running a Windows OS, but nobody was responsible for updating the OS on the Windows shipping machine. So now it's 2 years old, it's highly vulnerable, it's an easy way in, but guess what? It's connected to the network, et cetera, et cetera. And so again, back to your point, learning about that device, and guess what? Now it's acting differently. You can respond to those quickly before there's data exfiltration or there's issues inside the environment.
Correct.
So Steve, I think we talked a lot about the solution and some of the automation keys. So maybe this is a follow-on to that. But I mean, you run our security team. You're working with a lot of customers and trying to help them make decisions. Many of them have limited budgets, so they're trying to figure out what dollars go where. So when they're evaluating capabilities around detection, we've talked a lot about some automation things today, but any thoughts that you have of things that would be key elements for customers like that to consider as they're kind of moving down that path?
Yeah, I think the first question we have to ask ourselves as security professionals is our life choices. How did we end up here? Why do we hate ourselves? That's a joke. Anyway, no, there are some questions you have to ask. I think when it comes to detection services, the first thing you have to do is just say, where are your gaps? Where do you need to attack first? Obviously, Stealthwatch Cloud is a flow data analysis kind of machine learning tool that helps you do what we just talked about. You have SIMs that are log storage / correlation engines, and you have endpoint protection stuff. So I think the first thing you need to say is, where do I need to start? Where's my biggest weakness? What do I need to do as far as what detection thing do I need to kind of focus on? Otherwise, you end up kind of surrounded by shrink wrap. You bought clear as we're going to buy. The second thing I always look for is ease of use. I mean, is this something I can train personnel up on quickly? Is this something where the dashboards and the admin functions are intuitive, easy to learn? And can I hook data sources if it's a SIM or if it's something like this? Is it something that I can draw from many different kind of data sources to get my information? Next, secret sauce. You know, what do they have to offer, depending on what technology you're looking at that no one else has to offer? What do they do? How do they do it? And why do they do it well? What do they bring to the table? What kind of threat intelligence sources do they use? I know Cisco has this amazing thing called Talos that probably is hard to touch by other groups, but you have Risk IQ and you have Virus Total and you have other kind of intelligence sources to run these kind of detection tools. And then the last, you know, are you alerting for alert's sake, or are you giving me real alerts that I can act on? So anyone who's been working in security, my God, how many alerts have we looked at over the years and said, you know, this is a false positive. I don't know what to do with this. This doesn't really mean anything. And it's called alert fatigue, and it's what makes people miss real problems. So what I would say is, you know, how few false positives they have and how valuable are the alerts that the tool is presenting.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I in complete agreement. And, you know, we both share kind of responsibilities of operating teams like this. And so we think, you know, similarly in terms of manageability and automation and those things, because, you know, my experience is I've seen a lot of organizations evaluate, you know, tool sets and, you know, dig into, you know, specific features and functionality. And, you know, the fact is 25% of that they'll probably never use, but it becomes part of this decision-making process. But what they fail to look at is what does it look like once deployed, and what is the kind of required capability, staffing, training, operational teams to be able to make that solution worthwhile. And so, you know, really, I think what the industry, you know, this is Gary's opinion, but what the industry needs to find is that kind of maximum level of technology with the minimum level of operational effort, and try and find that common ground to where you can get as much as you need, but you don't require an army of people that sit behind that, because that's when the cost of security goes really high and the CFO no longer is interested in supporting the project. So yeah, I completely agree. I know this is not a sales discussion, but I do want to give you know, our attendees kind of the sense of, okay, what does consumption look like for a solution like this? So maybe Jim, if you can just give us the model in terms of consumption, or, you know, how the solution is kind of priced out, just so people can kind of be thinking about what that would look like from a kind of a cost model perspective. I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah, sure, Gary. So we size two different ways, right? So private network monitoring, our premise-based solution, is based on the number of active endpoints that we discover and model for you on your network. Estimate there, we found on average, there's about 2.5 endpoints per employee, right? So if an entity has 300 employees, we'd expect to see somewhere around 750 endpoints, and, you know, scales up or down depending on that. And there's a per endpoint price that they pay. In the cloud, it's really based on the flow level or flow record. Okay, we use a proprietary measurement standard or tool called an effective megaflow. It's basically 1 million lines worth of data. Why we use the word effective is that we've eliminated some lines. So we eliminate duplication and different things like that we see in a record. Right? There's some packet information just not important to us in terms of doing our modeling. So we try and discard that or eliminate that from a flow capture perspective. So that also impacts, you know, it's a more efficient price point for the user. The best way to really understand the environment is through our POV, right? And to work with partners like you to bring up a trial. And then that's where, you know, we size environments fairly quickly once we're deployed.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Clean, relatively simple, just kind of expected traffic, and I think that's fairly consistent. on the industry. So thanks for that. I can't believe every time we do this, I'm blown away by how quickly we get to the top of the hour. So we have talked, we have gotten into the on-prem versus the cloud. We talked about what type of data that we're extracting through an AWS, say, environment versus how we use NetFlow or do a Gigamon to span or tap networks inside an on-prem environment. We've talked about the modeling of devices, the visibility in terms of how we're seeing new devices, and then obviously the behavioral aspects of, hey, something's changing. It's no longer acting like a printer. It's acting like something else. That's not right. Let's try to fix that. So it's been really interesting. And like I said, I've certainly learned a lot, and sounds like, very compelling offer. So just, always want to wrap with any kind of last comments or thoughts from the panelists, things that, I didn't ask today, or just thoughts that you have that might be relevant that you haven't had the opportunity to share. Anybody have anything that they feel like they want to get off their chest?
Yeah, Chris, I just want to say that, I think it's been said, but I think from a security perspective, one of the things that oftentimes causes companies to just drown in the amount of data they're collecting, right, is the ability to correlate data and to be able to discern what's an actionable thing and what's not. And again, I said earlier, we talked about the easy button, Gary, you know how I feel about that in most cases, but in a lot of organizations, they really just want to be aware of and cognizant of situations where they might be seeing something that's not normal. And I think this tool does that. And that's what I personally like about it, is that it's not something where you have to do a lot of customization, fiddling and diddling with different things to get that data. It's pretty much like, hey man, we've got an open ACL, you need to go check this out. Or, you wake up in the morning and you find out that one of your colleagues implemented something that, might be exposed to something. It's very, very helpful, from my experience, to be able to see stuff like that in a way that it's actionable. I don't have to go sit there and look at something for 4 hours before I figure out if it's actually something I need to do. So that's, to me, the biggest benefit to this product.
Yeah, and I think that Steve was talking a little bit about that too, with just kind of that alert fatigue. I remember turning up a solution. This is probably like, I don't know, maybe 2005, something like that. And it was, we flipped it on, and the first day there were like 5,000 alarms. Like, okay, well, yeah, good luck having anybody to respond to that.
We used to literally turn stuff up like security stuff, or even just network monitoring tools, and I guarantee you could go back there in a month and people would just not even be looking at the screen anymore, because it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
So, that's what I'm saying. There's a point where you get too much information and a lot of it's horse shit. It's the same stuff over and over again. Or it's, you have an event but there's 5 things behind it that once this event happened, you don't need 5,000 alerts, right? So this is, it's succinct and it's actionable, right? So that's all.
Good stuff. Jim, John, anything from you guys?
Gary, I would just piggyback on, based on what Chris was describing there, right? Is one thing we found is that and we feel it's unique, perhaps it's not, but the fact that if you think about all the different teams that might be involved in scenarios around building out cloud platforms and security, you think about DevOps and SecOps and NetOps and things like that. We've actually found that each of those teams within entities find value in Stealthwatch Cloud. Okay, so if you are, what Chris was describing, right? If you're working in a premise or data center environment, okay, we can reveal and create clarity for you, okay, that benefits multiple teams within your environment. And if you're on a journey into the cloud and you want to accelerate that, okay, we're a tool that, because of our hybrid nature, allows people to do that also. Okay, so we've seen a lot of benefit, like I said, and we see, lots of different buyer types across our user base today because of that ability to, reveal and identify, and as a result of that, be able to help people accelerate, their infrastructure to support their business.
And we can do free trials, and this is the team that's involved in it.
Everybody can do a free trial, yes.
Yeah, and Chris and Steve are from our side are kind of up to speed and capable of being able to help customers launch that. So lots to be able to react to. So gentlemen, thank you very much for the time this afternoon. Really enjoyed the discussion. Great conversation. Really interesting to see where the industry is going, and it seems like the customers that are using the technology are the ones that are benefiting from these advancements. So fantastic stuff. And again, just appreciate your time. Thanks to all the attendees for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.